Okay guys, we're going to be looking at exercise 12C today. Well, we're going to look at part of it anyway. We're going to look at how to set up a transition matrix, and we're also going to have a look at what that information tells us when we have it set up. Okay, so we use transition diagrams to set up particular situations. This one here is of a car rental firm. So here's Bendigo and here's Colac, and both have a place where you can rent a car, and you can either return the car to the place where you got it, or you can return it to the other office. So if I arrive in Colac and I want to head over to Bendigo, I can return the car to Bendigo if that's what I wanted to do. Alright? So this diagram gives us a fair amount of information. So this is Bendigo here, and this internal loop in the diagram tells us that 80% of the cars rented in Bendigo get returned to Bendigo. It tells us that 20% of the cars, therefore, that get rented in Bendigo go to Colac. Now, a quick check, 80 plus 20 therefore equals 100% of the cars. We've taken care of 100% of the cars. That's good. Now, Colac, the internal loop tells us that 90% of the cars that are rented in Colac get returned to Colac. Therefore, we're dealing with 100% here. That means 10% of the cars that are borrowed or rented in Colac get returned to Bendigo. Okay. With any kind of network drawing like this, this is called a transition diagram, we can draw this as a matrix. So if you have a look down here, I've got rented in versus returned to. Now, we've got Bendigo. So if we go back to our diagram here, 80% of the cars rented in Bendigo are returned to Bendigo. So in my matrix, B, rented in, returned to 0.8. I've taken the percentage from the transition diagram and I've converted that into a decimal. So that decimal is 0.8. And we know that the rest of the cars that are rented in Bendigo, the 20%, get returned to Colac. So down here, I've got rented in Bendigo, returned to Colac, 0.2. Okay? And a quick check for me is to go down that column and see that that column adds up to 100. Now, can it be that way? No. Make sure your columns, when you go down your columns are what add up to 100. I don't want the rows adding up to 100. I need the columns to come down and add to 100%. Okay, so really, really important when you're drawing your transition matrices that your columns are what add up to 100%. All right, if we continue, cars rented in Colac and returned to Bendigo, well, that's 10% of the vehicles. That's this line here. In Colac, go to Bendigo, 10%. So 0.1. Therefore, the 90% that are rented in Colac and are returned to Colac, 0.9, goes into my matrix down here. Okay, so I've taken the information from my transition matrix and I've turned it into a matrix. And again, the same thing with the Colac column, 0.1 plus 0.9, that will add up to my 100%. In the first part of exercise 12C, that's what you're going to be doing. So start with your hubs, your letters, and then draw in your lines. Okay? Now, imagine that I didn't know what the value was that was going from Colac to Bendigo. So I'd have to take my 90%, and I know that I have to have 100% of cars. So I'd go 100% minus 90, and that would tell me that that value there had to be 10%, of course. Okay. So imagine 50 cars are rented in Bendigo for the week. Let's just stop and think about what information we can work out from this. We know 20% of 50 cars are going to end up in Colac. So we can do a quick sum, can't we? We can do 50 multiplied by 0.2, and that'll tell us how many cars go from Bendigo to Colac for that week. Now, I assume the answer is 10 cars. It is. 10 cars end up in Colac. So that tells us that from our 50 cars, 80% of them get borrowed in Bendigo and get returned to Bendigo. So again, 50 cars multiplied by 0.8 will tell us that 40% of those cars end up staying in Bendigo. So we can take a transition diagram, we can turn it into a matrix, and then we can use that information to do calculations about where numbers are going and what's happening with those numbers. Okay, for chapter 12C, that's the first two parts of the exercise. Setting up matrices from transition diagrams and then interpreting them. Being able to work out the answers to those questions. Remember, the notes are on Compass. These are a reduced form of the original notes. I know I did a further example in the original, but I'm running short on time. It's already Monday night and I'm still making this video and getting ready to upload it. So I am running behind. So I will see you in class with the WebEx to mark the roll and go through this with you. All right, guys, see you later.